Welcome everybody. It's 7 o'clock. We're going to get started with Wednesday Wind Down with Friends, with Dan and Friends. Let's say it right. Wednesday Wind Down with Dan and Friends. I can edit out that last part. So I'm Dan Conger. Tonight I'm drinking Walker 805, and with me is Kelly. Would you introduce yourself?
Kelly Mamer, and I've already mentioned, I'm drinking a Crown Royal Rye. I'm a whiskey guy. This is what's a rye, but it's a whiskey. It's great.
So this is a webinar and YouTube video channel for frustrated hikers and outdoors people that can't do much outdoors or get together with their friends. So I like to go hiking and go drinking beer with my friends. It's been really challenging to do that, so I'm going to do it virtually. So before we get started with Kelly's going to be talking about Mineral King, but I wanted to take a minute and kind of look back at some of what's going on the last week in our country. And I'm not going to get too deep, but I want to recognize some of the things that are going on. So our country has been ignoring serious race and inequality issues for years, right? This is nothing new. This has been going on. It's been at the surface, under the surface, but it's been going on for a long time. So right now in June of 2020, people are screaming for something to change. So I don't have any experience, and I'm not even the right person. I'm an old white guy, so I can't speak to violence that people have experienced, but I can speak to this outdoor divide, the divide that separates people of color and people of different income levels from the outdoors. So I wanted to talk about that. So in that mindset, I've got a short video I'm going to share, and it's except I didn't queue it up. Give me a moment here. My bad. It's a short video from the Sierra Club that we're going to share, and we're going to play that for you. And we're just going to let it speak for itself and then talk when it's done. So it's a super short, to the point video from the Sierra Club, and a couple things stood out to me that I knew in my heart, but they were good reminders. That it's healthy to be outdoors. People, all of us that go outside, we know that, we know it's for our mental health, right? Like I might say, man, I've had a shitty week. I need to get out on the trail. But there's actually a physical health component to it. So we know that in our heart. We also kind of suspect that people of color and low income folks don't live near green spaces, places where we're going to go out and play, whether they're a trail area or even just a good local park. And the one that just kind of kicks you in the teeth is that 80% of the people in national parks, that's staff or visitors, are white. And keep that in mind next time you're on the trail. Now, if you're in a national forest, is the statistic different? I don't really know, but to know that there are not as many people of color out on the trail. So for me, that says that it's really obvious that we need to work to get everybody outside, especially people of color and especially people from marginalized communities. So I wanted to highlight two things from the Sierra Club, and that's under this Outdoors for All project. One of them, the first one, is Inspiring Connections Outdoors. And this is a Sierra Club project that connects marginalized communities with outdoor experiences. And that's been, some of us in San Diego know it as ICO. It's been around for a while. The other one, it's also a Sierra Club project, is Nearby Nature. And this is a little bit more involved. It's another Sierra Club project that works on service projects, developing leaders, and public policies, all related to the outdoors. So here's my request and my challenge to you. is to look up these groups, look up other groups that do similar things, that reach out to marginalized groups, to people of color, and donate to them, right? Let's do something with the dollars that we have. Before I made this request, I'm like, I need to put some money to it, right? So I busted out my card and donated to the ICO. So maybe you can even get involved with them if you happen to be local, if your skill set fits there. This isn't going to solve any violence issues. Absolutely not. And it's definitely, if you had to go at the hierarchy of significance, it's lower on that. But I think we can, as a society, we can work on that violence issue and this outdoor divide at the same time. It doesn't have to be either or. That's what I wanted to share with you. I think it's significant. I know this is only scratching the surface, but I wanted to acknowledge what's going on in our country. So
thanks, Dan. I think that's great. Personally, I couldn't agree more. So thank you for saying
awesome.
all that.
So that said, Kelly's going to share about a trip that he and I and a couple other people have gone on. And this is a Mineral King trip. So I think it's your turn to share the screen.
I will do that. So yeah, this is kind of the second in a little series. I don't know, hopefully Dan will keep inviting me back because I enjoy these, to do these little discussions about some of the trips. I think I'd mentioned for anybody that had heard this before, I've gone backpacking now with Dan to the Sierras for about 5 years now, along with some other wonderful people. We've talked about Sandra and Rich and Dan's brother Mike. So we previously had a quick travel log on the North and South Lake trip that we did a number of years ago. This was the following year that we went to Mineral King. So Mineral King is an area that is in the south part of Sequoia Park. National Park. It was sort of a late addition to Sequoia National Park. It originally was, you can probably tell by the name, it was actually an area that they thought they would kind of turn into a mining area. It was discovered, people kind of came down the canyon that we actually went up the first day and found this area, found some mines. There's a lot of settlements in the area that stayed for years, like there's a place called Silver City. There's all these little areas as part of this Mineral King area. But it was not part of the park. It was just it was a part that there's history that I'm not going to get into. But at one point, Disney was trying to build a large ski resort in the area, and that would have been pretty devastating to the area from a natural beauty standpoint, of course. And I know the Sierra Club fought that. And at some point in the late 70s, basically this whole area got added to Sequoia National Park. So this is really the very south end. The access to it is, it's interesting when you come, as if you're going into Sequoia Park, there's a kind of a road that heads off that's only, I think, 25 miles, but it takes 2 hours to drive because this is the craziest little road. I mean, it's beautiful, but it's narrow and twisty. And so you just have to be careful. But
take your time.
Once you get into the Mineral King area, you can kind of see on the left, there's where sort of the town and where we started. This whole area, there's paths everywhere. What we did was a loop kind of around the heart of it, just right through the middle. There's another path that basically you can cut that's pretty kind of challenging, goes through some pretty high peaks. And then to the north of this, if you get a little farther, pretty soon you're into the Bear Paw Meadows and up north part of Sequoia where you hit the High Sierra Trail. Over to the right of this, you're working your way towards the Kern River Valley. So it's in a really great area and just a lot of really nice ups and downs and some great places to see. Like I said, the road in was pretty crazy for us. Because of that, we basically, instead of doing any backpacking the first day, I think we just camped at Mineral King. We didn't actually book anything. We just walked until we found some nice people that had a relatively large campsite and only one tent, and they were friendly enough to let us drop our tents on their site, and we got to know some people. So that was a fun evening. We got our pass, our permit from the ranger, and it was about a 2-hour lecture we got from the ranger, which wasn't really a lecture. It was interactive, but she was going into the whole history of John Muir and what it meant for national parks and what their charter was and everything. And it was actually quite interesting. But she was very passionate about it. So that was.
I think we engaged her. I think we egged her on. So
I think so. Yes.
If we wouldn't have asked questions or made comments, it might have been a little shorter.
But it was fun. We had nowhere else to be, so we had a good kind of evening, and then so we took off the first day, and away we went. But before we could go anywhere, if you remember last time I talked about these little buggers, these marmots. Well, one of the things they love to do is to chew brake lines and other parts of cars that are not protected. So this is basically a rite of passage if you're up through a certain part of the year. And I think we went the first week of August, ended to July, and it was right about that time when sort of the end of the period that they're bad for coming in and chewing up on cars, and you'd show up a week later and wouldn't be going anywhere. So we had this whole process where and every car was like this, had a little tarped up the car. It's kind of something to do to get us going before we were ready to start hiking.
That was awesome that Rich found that big 20-foot tarp that he just drove right on, and
it was this like bright orange tarp, and you'll see at the very end that we were the only ones that had an orange tarp. So it was it was very distinctive. So the one thing that came up a lot this particular year, I think this was 2017 maybe. That was the year after the big snow year. So, I mean, as part of our trip, we were going to do actually a larger trip than what we ended up doing. As has become a theme with us, we're very flexible.
Right.
Either we decide that we didn't have as much in us, or we had somebody who was struggling a little bit. And so this particular year, we were really worried about water because we were going to be doing some ice bridges and things that we were really checking. That became more of an issue the next year. Foreshadowing High Sierra Trail.
That doesn't look like anything. It's just like go right through that. That's
it. It was like we had a lot of water this year, but yeah, I think we got to this one and thought, okay, water can't be that bad. And then we realized that was actually what we had to cross. And
okay, that
was definitely a theme. You're going to see lots of water because we definitely crossed a lot. But
I remember that was in the first 5 miles. That wasn't even.
Yeah, we were right away. We got to that and we were like, oh Lord! But
or in for it.
So that was the whole way up. Again, lots of deer, lots of animals. It was kind of we're starting pretty low at Mineral King, so we went up about 3,000 feet that first day to get to about 10,000 feet to get up to. Actually, there's a good picture of us looking back. We were just this point is kind of where we got out of the Franklin Canyon and headed towards the Franklin Lake, and you can see all the way back to where we started is way back at that low point. The little trees way up in the top corner there, you can see the kind of the stand of trees at the top. That some more foreshadowing. We saw that 6 days later when we came back the other way. So we got to Franklin Lake, beautiful lake. It's actually formed by a dam, but it kind of feeds into the whole canyon. It was interesting though. It's a popular place, but we didn't really see people. But partly because we kind of found a place that wasn't close to other people, but we didn't have a lot of room. So I think if I remember right, you guys put your tents down in this little area, and you were just basically on a slab buffeted right off the edge of the lake.
There were no stakes going in the ground that night.
Yeah, right. I was up a little high. I found the one spot that was up a little higher. I had a little room to put some stakes, but it was a stormy, windy night, crazy night. Good experience that first. This was the first time I'd used this tent. This is the first year I started getting lighter. Of course, every year you get new stuff. So this is the first year for this tent. The first night that I actually had it out, and I didn't quite learn the best way to tie it all down until later in the trip when I got soaked. But this at least it's handled the wind okay. So that part was good.
Right.
So,
good.
Yeah. So next morning, there's the colors coming, and we're ready to head up to Franklin Pass, which is another couple thousand feet above where we were. You can see a better picture of the lake there, the dam kind of at the very end. Like I said, we were camped down there, but we're working our way up past the tree line into the snow. Because, like I said, it was a rainy year and a wet year, so there was still lots of snow we saw on this trip. Almost every pass we had some good snow. Right. And that one doesn't look like much, but eventually we got to a point where we had to either go about a mile out of our way to get down from the pass, or we had to do this, which was
snowshoot of death.
Snowshoot, which it doesn't look like much here. You'll see in the next picture that it's a little higher, but it was at a pretty good speed that you had to go. We were all pretty good at trying to hold our pace. At the bottom there, when you got to the bottom, we had about a 6 foot area that if you went to the left, you were perfectly fine. But if you went 6-7 feet to the right, you might be regretting your decision a little bit.
Go a couple 100 feet down, that's all.
Yeah, you were regretting it a lot. But we all made it down. We really talked about it because we weren't sure if it was safe, but we really felt that it was. And then, as you can see there, it's actually a pretty good, healthy slide from top to bottom. And those two guys at the top, after watching us do it, decided to take the extra hour and go around the long way.
That was a blast. That was a lot of fun.
That was a really cool experience. I think that was my first real big, snow glissade. So then we headed our way down to Rattlesnake Canyon. So this is kind of the very, very south end of Sequoia National Park. very pretty. And, it's just a nice day. It was mostly downhill. We got to I think it was Forester Lake.
Yeah, that's right. Forester Lake.
And we found a family that was camping, and they actually were here for, I think, 4 or 5 days. They basically hiked into this point, and they were just staying. They took a different hike in. They came kind of all the way from Rattlesnake Canyon. There's a easier path, I guess. But they were, I think, 2 kids. They were great. They were fishing. They were having a good old time. So it was kind of nice to see that kind of camping out there. From there to our lake, Little Clare, I think we had about a mile, but it turned out to be about 500 feet up and down, which was miserable. But,
right, that always adds to it.
At the end of the day, yeah, you always get those at the end of the day. But this was beautiful. That's one of my favorite pictures of there's Dan and Rich and Sandra and Mike all kind of hanging out, ready to sit down next to Little Clare Lake. So that was a beautiful little lake. We had a lot of time that night to do a little walking around, and that's the night when I think we made some thinking about what to change our trip.
Yes,
we did. Right. And next day we had more water crossings. I love this picture. I had to get this in there because Dan's always our thinker, trying to figure out the best way to cross everywhere. We usually get together and all take our time, but you can see Dan really trying to puzzle through this one. If I remember right, I think a lot of pants came off. It wasn't just rolling up the pants. I think it was pants coming off to get across this one. Don't worry, I didn't put any underwear pictures in yet. More foreshadowing.
Kelly, I'm going to interrupt for a second. I want to remind people that if they've got questions, put them in the Q&A or the chat. We'll catch them at the end, and we're about halfway through our time.
Perfect. Thank you. So, I'm just kind of flying through. Really, like I said, this area, there's so many different things we could do. This was that day again. Different fauna, more of the ferns and some nice forests. We were kind of working our way through. We knew we had a little more time to spend because we were going to be cutting the days off a little bit. So, and we really hadn't run into very many people, so it was nice. It's one of these ones where we kind of had it to ourselves for the most part. There's my dog deciding to go and say hi to somebody. So this is actually interesting that I put this in because this is looking down the Kaweah Canyon towards the Kern River Canyon. And the very next year when we did the High Sierra Trail, we were up on the left side of the picture, up near the top in the same area that we were eventually going to dive down into the Kern River Canyon. So it's there's so many cool things in the area. I mean, I know you guys and veterans of the Sierras know all these areas. For somebody like me who was pretty new and just kind of seeing how everything's so close, it's stunning how many beautiful areas there are to go that are so easy, not just easy to get to, but that when you get there, there's so many areas that are close by and also,
it might be a ridge and 3 passes away, but it's relatively close as the crow.
Exactly. You're right. It's like that thing when you're a kid, you're saying, how close is that mountain? I bet you I could touch it. And you realize you're still 10 miles away. So it's not really as close as you think. But,
which is a day and a half.
Yeah. So that next night we got to a campsite that was kind of at the main junction heading, that one of the sort of the middle point where you could head back to Mineral King if you went right across the middle. The problem wasn't a problem. We had a nice area, but the problem with all the water was we definitely had a mosquito problem this year.
Buggy. Yeah.
We got to this campsite pretty early. I know we did some day hikes, you, Sandra, and I, but we had a lot of time just to hang around the campsite, and I think I spent almost all of it with the netting on. So
it's when you needed.
One time I forgot I had it on and tried to eat something, and that's always a good lesson.
It's when you need to drop your pants and trying to swat mosquitoes away and hover.
Yeah. No, that's
good times.
So the next day we got to an area called the Big Five Lakes. There's Big Five and Little Five Lakes in that area. This was part of the Big Five. And we did run into a group here that we had actually run into their partners. So it was interesting as we were crossing this little natural bridge. There was 2 different groups from San Diego, from Point Loma Nazarene, I think.
Point Loma Nazarene, right.
Yeah, and they were basically, they started Mineral King together, and one group went counterclockwise and one went clockwise halfway around the circle, and then they were going to basically meet up and cut through the middle together. So we did see the first group a little bit on our first day, and then we ran to these guys. It was interesting. I mean, just as an aside, you're talking about the opportunity to get people of many different races and diversity. It was nice. This was a good example of a pretty good group that was actually pretty diverse. I remember being very impressed with how diverse they were, and they enjoyed it. I think they had like the Stars and Bars or something? What was their thing?
On their arms, somebody had something that looked like a tattoo, and my brother Mike says, could I ask you about your tattoo? And I'm like, oh, that's not a tattoo, that's Sharpie. And they had a star, they had a series of stars and maybe a series of bars. And the stars were every time they had seen a wonderful sight. So they had a deer sighting, they saw a beautiful sunset or a beautiful lake view, right? That was, then they would get a star. So it would be, and then we're like, well, what are the bars? They're like, every time they dropped a deuce. It's like, being regular on the trail is a good thing, right? So they're trying to encourage people to
Make
not
sure
hold
they're
it
doing
in.
their, yeah, staying regular. And the funny thing was not to, we were only like 3 days in. I think the one girl had like 9 bars on her, something like ridiculous number.
Right. There's some fiber in our diet.
That might be overdoing it. So we eventually got to the Big Five, the lake. This was a very fun little campsite. This was the night that we had most of the rain, and you can probably tell any experienced backpacker will look at that tent of mine and think, boy, that's a really crappy job of pulling that end taut, which it was, which I found that in the middle of the night when the tent was basically in on my face because of all the rain. But this was the night that we decided to do our annual big surprise, and it was the costume party. And so this was, I think we'd mentioned, if anybody remembers the last one, we talked about the luau we had and Dan bringing in a bunch of stuff. Well, this year we all agreed that we were going to make superhero costumes of whatever we thought they needed to be. And obviously Dan's got the Batman thing going. Sandra made her own because she's multi-talented in every way. And she did hers is the Stitch Bitch.
Stitch Bitch.
I believe.
Right.
I think Rich was Captain Awkward. I believe he was Captain America's awkward cousin.
Right, correct.
I attempted to be the Human Torch, which would have been even more impressive if it was dark because I had a whole little light thing that was strapped around my body that would light up and make it look like it was glowing.
Didn't work at 5 o'clock.
It was pouring rain. It was pouring rain by the time we got around to it, so that didn't really work so well. But what the hell? And Mike, who didn't quite get the theme quite right, didn't understand that we weren't actually doing costumes, and I believe that he just pinned the superhero to his jacket.
And to add irony to that, his superhero that he used was Captain Obvious.
Yeah.
And yep. So that's what he had pinned to his jacket there.
So we like to bug Mike. Mike's always the guy that we like to and he was living up to it this time. So.
Right.
Anyway, so the next day
for us.
Exactly. We had a really short day the next day again because we had cut some pretty significant miles out. So we really kind of sauntered towards Little Five Lakes. Which was, we kind of camped here, but we were there early enough that we had a great time. I think Mike did a hike around the lake. Sandra and Rich went and visited some little icebergs. You and I, oh my God. What are we thinking, Dan?
Well, yeah. I want to go.
I thought we'd go swimming.
I want to swim out to that iceberg in the middle of the lake.
Yeah.
And my expression there, I'm the one in the black shorts. My expression is, could you take the damn picture? It's freaking cold out here.
Yeah.
And Kelly, the Canadian, is like, I'm in my natural element.
Yeah, well, I have a lot of extra padding, which I'm very proud of, apparently, and my red Crocs, which I'm also proud of. Which I we'll tell a story about those later. So, yeah, that was us. It was a beautiful time. It was a nice lake though. The view was great. And again, there's Mount Kauai in the background, which was my spirit mistress for the following year. I had no idea how important she would be to me the next year, but she was. So we were getting into our last couple of days. We were heading over our last pass, and of course, there we are with some more snow, more ice. This one was quite a long way, and it was more of a not dangerous, but more of a challenge than any other one was for sure. So,
a little bit of a slog, yeah. This was Black Rock Pass, which would be
Black Rock Pass, yeah. And I thought this picture was amazing because to the right is where we camped that night, or to the left, sorry, the lake. That was the Little Five Lake. To the right is the Big Five Lake that we were camped at the night before. As it turns out, we were only about a mile apart as the crow flies, but that's quite the crow fly. So
you had to go all the way around that whole big ridge. Yeah.
So, but there we were at a pass with our jackets and had no rest, nice and cold. So this day was a good exercise of you're in your mind, you're like, I'm going down 4,000 feet. It's an easy day. It's all downhill. It's great. It was a long, long, long way downhill. But it's beautiful. We passed, I think at one point we passed the Pinto Creek Campground and decided it was a great idea to open up the bear locker just for no good reason at all. And what did you find, Dan?
I found a week's worth of trash in there.
Yeah.
And I let out a string of curse words that shocked my trail mates.
Yes.
It was just so infuriated that someone would leave their trash there. So I'm infuriated that there's trash in there. Additionally, additionally, once you've seen it, you got to carry it out.
Yeah.
So it turns out that we packed out all that trash between the between all five of
We
us.
did, yeah.
But then we had to
Bottles, liquor bottles. I know.
God, it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
It was pretty awful.
So yes,
was that the year that I also found the 3-pound sledgehammer in there and didn't carry that?
You did that. You left.
We left, and I just told the ranger. I said, "Sorry, you got to get that one yourself."
Yeah. So anyway, we got to Cliff Creek, and I had to show this because this is my famous red Crocs. My 2 beautiful red Crocs that I had became one that night because the other one is now floating somewhere in Lake Kauai because it fell off my foot, and there's no catching things on those rapids. So I got a lot of grief from my campmates for the leave no trace principles, which I was definitely not doing a very good job of. I swear it wasn't purposeful. I still miss my red Croc. So. Finally, the last day, we were heading back up again, one more pretty good uphill to Timber Gap. This was kind of more of a leafy, timbery area, lots of beautiful colors. Sandra is always in the front because she's always the one that leads the way up hills. Lots of flowers, I could have shown 100 pictures of flowers, but it was actually a good year for flowers. We were even late as it was just because of all the wetness and the rain, and lots of timber. This is kind of looking back where we came from. Got to see more of our friends. And there we were looking back down, and like I said, there was one orange car. Very easy to figure out which was our car when we got to the top of the gap, and at that point we knew we weren't that far away. So
awesome.
So that's kind of it. There's the parking lot. There is kind of where, just a reminder where we started. That was where we went up the big loop, and
awesome.
That was our trip to Mineral King.
Killer. Well, I had a couple questions that popped up in here, so we got a few minutes we can answer them. Sure. Let's see what they were. Nice hair, Kelly. Okay, we got that one. Dave Cowan made a good comment that the ICO, the Sierra Club ICO in San Diego was always looking for leaders. So if you're ever interested, I think since they work with youth a lot, they do have some requirements there, but not much. Leslie asked the question is, which trailhead was this? And it was out of Mineral King, but we left on, what was the name of it?
Oh, I honestly, there's 2 of them that kind of went off. I don't remember the name. I think
it's like Frank.
Yeah, it might have been Franklin Pass or something.
Yeah, Franklin Pass, because it goes to Franklin last, and then we came out over Timber Gap.
Gap, definitely it was Timber Gap. I think it was called. Yeah,
right. So we came
out.
Yeah,
I know from the bottom, you can kind of at the very end of the road, there are sort of 2 trails that go off. One heads off to the right, and just in this picture, it kind of heads in. It doesn't really go. It goes like 10, 12 miles in, and then that's it. It's more of a day hike kind of thing. Sure. The way we went, like I said, is around, and then it's kind of hard to tell. But from the parking lot, if you kind of picture going straight off to the left side of the picture, that's another trail that goes right across the middle. That's the one that goes across Columbine Peak, and it's a pretty hard slog. I think it's more easy to do from the back way, the way the Point Loma Nazarene students were doing it. So.
Another question was, what was your tent that you had, Kelly? What is that tent that you're using?
That one's a Big Agnes. It's a UL Scout Extra. It's a good tent, actually. I've used it now for a few years in a row. I'm pretty much ready to replace it, but it's just a single wall, so it really does. You kind of have to get really good at making sure you pitch it out right and everything to keep your keep the water. But once I learned that and got better at it, it uses your pole, so it's really reasonably light, and it survived some pretty good windstorms and some good rainstorms. I'm not sure. I know Big Agnes sometimes can get beat up by the wind a little bit, but so far this one's done well.
So this hike was in early August, but do you remember what the total mileage was, Kelly?
I think I looked at it. I think it ended up only being about 44, 43, something like that. It was a little lighter. I think our original plan was about 60, 58.
Right.
And we cut a pretty big chunk off because we were going to go all the way up to part of the High Sierra Trail and up to Precipice Lake.
And then come back down, right?
Yeah, and so I think because of the short, and we had, like I said, probably the one day we only hiked about 4 miles or something like that. So but
if you were aggressive on mileage, you could probably do an easy 4-day hike, and if you wanted a lollygag around, you could turn it into a full 7 and even do a little less mileage. So there's lots of good options up there.
There are. It's definitely got some 4-day hike potential by cutting through the middle too, if that's something you really want to do. So.
And then one last question, we'll close it out, is it always a good idea to protect your cars year round? Well, the common knowledge seems to be, or the common wisdom seems to be, early summer to midsummer, the marmots seem to be most active in this area. So June and July, definitely a good idea. We were being on the cautious side, doing it in August. That said, I would probably always do it. Anytime I go to Mineral King, I'd probably do it. It wasn't an enormous pain in the ass.
Right. It really wasn't. Not with the number of people we had.
Right.
And honestly, as we were doing it, we saw like 3 or 4 marmots kind of hanging out in the trees, right? They, there was definitely some evidence that they were hanging out. So
Right. Okay. Awesome. Hey, thanks so much, Kelly. We do appreciate it.
not a problem. I enjoyed it a lot. Thanks.
Cool.
And thanks everyone for joining.
So next week, we'll be back. And next week, I'm going to have Melody Hughes on, and from First Aid Gone Wild, and she's going to share some stuff about first aid kits. And I'd like to steer it towards adapting your own first aid kit, especially adapting it to your skill set. So if you have very simple first aid skills or none, maybe you want one first aid kit. If you have wilderness first aid, or if you're an EMT, you're probably going to a different first aid kit. So I'd like to focus it on that. So that's our plan for next week. I will put this on YouTube, and I'll see if there's any additional notes that belong in this as well. So thanks so much, everybody. I appreciate you coming. Kelly, again, thanks so much. And
thanks.
See y'all next week. Bye now.
Sounds great. Thanks, everyone.